The floorboards in our old Victorian house had a language all their own, and after 15 years of marriage, I'd learned to speak it fluently. The creak by the bathroom door meant Lydia was getting ready for work. The groan near the kitchen threshold told me she was making her morning coffee. But the soft whisper of wood beneath feet, padding toward our son's room at 11:30 at night. That was a conversation I'd never heard before. My name is James Harlan, though everyone calls me Jamie, and until 3 weeks ago, I thought I knew everything there was to know about my wife. I was wrong about a lot of things, as it turns out. The first time I heard those midnight footsteps, I chalked it up to motherly concern. Ethan had dropped out of college 6 months earlier and moved back home, carrying himself with the defeated slouch of someone who'd given up on life at 21. Maybe Lydia was checking on him, making sure he wasn't drowning in the depression that seemed to follow him around like a shadow. The second time, I started paying attention. Lydia Harlan, née Foster, was not the checking on people type. She was a corporate lawyer who approached problems with the surgical precision of a scalpel and the warmth of a tax audit. In our 15 years together, I'd seen her comfort exactly 3 people. Me, when my father died, Ethan, when he broke his arm at age 7, and her secretary, when the woman's husband left her for someone half his age. Each instance had been brief, efficient, and seemingly exhausting for Lydia, like she was forcing herself to perform an unnatural act. So when I heard her feet on those floorboards for the 3rd night in a row, I did what any reasonable husband would do. I followed her. The hallway stretched before me like a tunnel, lit only by the pale glow seeping under Ethan's door. I pressed myself against the wall, feeling like a burglar in my own home, and listened. Voices. Low, intimate, careful not to wake the neighbors or the husband sleeping down the hall. "We can't keep doing this," Lydia was saying, her voice carrying that particular tone she used when she was trying to convince a jury. Persuasive, manipulative, effective. "I know," came Ethan's reply, and something in his voice made my stomach drop. It wasn't the voice of a son talking to his mother. It was the voice of a man talking to his lover. I stood there in the darkness of my own hallway, in the house I'd been paying the mortgage on for 12 years, listening to my wife and my son having what was unmistakably an intimate conversation. The rational part of my brain, the part that had gotten me through 15 years as a firefighter before a back injury forced me into private security consulting, was cataloging evidence. The emotional part was screaming. "Your father suspects something," Lydia continued, and I heard the rustle of fabric, the soft sound of someone sitting on a bed. "He doesn't suspect anything," Ethan said, and I could hear the bitter laugh in his voice. "He's too busy trying to prove he belongs in your world to notice what's happening in his own house." That stung because it was true. Since Lydia had made partner at Brennan, Madison and Associates 3 years ago, I'd been fighting a losing battle to fit into her increasingly upscale social circle. Corporate lawyers and their spouses didn't typically socialize with ex-firefighters who now installed security systems for small businesses, no matter how good they were at their job. I heard more rustling, and then Lydia's voice, softer now. "He's a good man, Ethan. He doesn't deserve this." "Then why are we doing it?" The question hung in the air like smoke, and I found myself holding my breath, waiting for an answer I wasn't sure I wanted to hear. "Because," Lydia said finally, "sometimes what we deserve and what we need are 2 different things." I'd heard enough. More than enough. I crept back to our bedroom, slipped under the covers, and stared at the ceiling until dawn painted the windows gray. When Lydia returned to our bed an hour later, smelling of that expensive cologne Ethan had started wearing, I pretended to be asleep. But I wasn't sleeping. I was planning. The next morning, I drove to Radio Shack. Yes, they still exist, barely, and bought the smallest surveillance camera I could find. Nothing fancy, nothing that would require a computer science degree to operate. Just a simple device that would record to a memory card and answer the question that was eating me alive. Exactly what was happening in my son's room every night? Lydia left for work at 7:30, same as always, her goodbye kiss landing on my cheek with the mechanical precision of a factory robot. Ethan emerged from his cave around noon, grunted something that might have been mourning, and disappeared into the basement to play video games until dinner. I had 6 hours. Installing the camera took 20 minutes. I positioned it behind Ethan's old baseball trophy collection, angled to capture most of the room while remaining invisible unless someone was specifically looking for it. The hard part wasn't the installation, it was waiting. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. For 3 days, I went through the motions of normal life. I installed a new alarm system at Henderson's Auto Parts, upgraded the security cameras at the downtown library, and pretended to care about the mundane details of other people's safety, while my own world was crumbling. Each evening, I sat through dinner with my wife and son, making small talk about their days, while mentally counting down the hours until I could check the camera. On the 4th night, I finally worked up the courage to review the footage. What I saw changed everything. The camera had captured 3 nights of activity, and it was worse than I'd imagined. Not just conversations, not just emotional intimacy. I watched my wife of 15 years and my son, engaged in behavior that made my hands shake and my vision blur with rage. But here's the thing about rage. It can either make you stupid or make you smart. It can send you charging into battle without a plan, or it can focus your mind like a laser and turn you into something you never thought you could be. I chose smart. I chose to become something they'd never see coming. The next morning, I called in sick to work for the first time in 3 years. Lydia raised an eyebrow over her coffee cup, but didn't comment. She was too busy reviewing case files to pay much attention to her husband's sudden interest in personal health days. "I think I'm coming down with something," I said, adding a slight rasp to my voice for authenticity. "There's orange juice in the fridge," she replied without looking up. "Try not to infect Ethan." If I hadn't already seen the footage, that comment might have seemed like normal maternal concern. Now it sounded like she was protecting her investment. After she left for the office, I spent the morning doing something I hadn't done since my firefighter days, conducting a thorough investigation. But instead of looking for the cause of a blaze, I was tracking the origins of my family's destruction. I started with Lydia's computer. She'd left it on the kitchen counter, password protected but not encrypted. After 15 years of marriage, I knew her well enough to guess her passwords, variations of her maiden name, our anniversary, Ethan's birthday. The 3rd attempt worked. Foster 2008, the year she'd made junior partner. Her email was a goldmine of information, but not the kind I'd expected. Yes, there were messages to Ethan, but they were brief and businesslike. "Dinner at 7. Don't forget your appointment. Your father is working late." Nothing that suggested the intimate relationship I'd witnessed on camera. But there were other emails, lots of them, to someone named Greg Madison. Greg Madison. The name was familiar, and it took me a moment to place it. Gregory Madison, senior partner at Brennan. Madison and Associates. Lydia's boss. The man who'd hired her straight out of law school and mentored her rise through the firm. The emails between Lydia and Greg painted a picture that made my stomach turn for entirely different reasons. They were having an affair. A long-term, elaborate, carefully orchestrated affair that had been going on for at least 2 years, based on the message timestamps. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was how they talked about me. "Jamie's getting suspicious," Lydia had written 6 months earlier. "He keeps asking about the late nights at the office." Greg's response: "Maybe it's time to tell him the truth, or at least part of it." "Not yet. I need more time to set things up properly. He'll fight the divorce, and I can't afford a messy split. Not with the partnership vote coming up." What about the boy? Ethan understands the situation. He's been very helpful, actually. I read that exchange 3 times before the implications sank in. Ethan knew about the affair. More than knew. He was actively helping to cover it up. The late-night conversations I'd been witnessing weren't between mother and son as lovers. They were between mother and son as co-conspirators. The relief was so intense it made me dizzy. My son wasn't sleeping with his mother. He was just helping her cheat on his father. Somehow, that didn't make me feel much better. I spent the rest of the morning reading through 2 years of correspondence between my wife and her lover, watching my marriage dissolve in real time through Gmail timestamps. They'd been careful. No explicit photos, no detailed descriptions of their physical relationship. But the emotional intimacy was clear in every message. Greg Madison was everything I wasn't. Ivy League educated, old money family, summer house in the Hamptons, winter ski trips to Aspen. He collected wine and art, drove a BMW, and wore suits that probably cost more than I made in a month. In short, he was exactly the kind of man Lydia's parents had always wanted her to marry. Instead, she'd married me. The blue-collar firefighter who'd pulled her out of a car wreck on I-95 15 years ago and somehow convinced her to go to dinner with him once she'd recovered. We'd been happy then, or at least I'd thought we were. Young love, physical attraction, the thrill of crossing class boundaries. But people change, priorities shift, and apparently, my wife had decided she'd married beneath herself. The emails made that clear enough. Jamie's a good man, she'd written to Greg, but he doesn't understand my world. He tries, but it's painful to watch sometimes, like a dog trying to walk on its hind legs. That particular metaphor was going to stick with me for a while. By noon, I'd read enough to understand the basic situation. Lydia wanted out of our marriage, but was waiting for the right moment to make her move. Greg was pressuring her to leave me, but she was stalling, worried about the financial implications and the effect on her career. Ethan was caught in the middle, loyal to his mother, but guilty about lying to his father. It was a mess, but it was a comprehensible mess. More importantly, it was a mess I could work with. I closed the laptop and walked to the bathroom mirror. The face staring back at me looked older than its 42 years, marked by 15 years of physical labor and 3 days of emotional devastation. But there was something new in the eyes, something calculating. "All right, Lydia," I said to my reflection. "You want to play games? Let's play games." The first rule of firefighting is that you never go into a burning building without knowing how you're going to get out. The second rule is that you never go in alone if you can help it. I was about to violate both rules, but I had advantages my wife didn't know about. I knew what she was planning. She didn't know that I knew. And I had 3 months of sick leave saved up, plus a network of contacts from my firefighting days who owed me favors. Most importantly, I had nothing left to lose. The rusty anchor hadn't changed much since my firefighter days. Same scarred wooden bar, same collection of mismatched chairs, same smell of beer and regret that seemed to permeate the walls. It was the kind of place where men went to drink away their problems and pretend they were still the heroes of their own stories. I found Mick O'Brien exactly where I'd expected, behind the bar, polishing glasses with the methodical precision of a man who'd been doing the same job for 30 years. Mick had been my captain back when I was fighting fires instead of installing alarm systems, and he'd saved my ass more times than I could count. "James Harlan," he said, without looking up from the glass in his hands. "Heard you were married to some fancy lawyer now. What brings you back to the land of the living?" "The fancy lawyer is screwing her boss," I said, sliding onto a bar stool, "and my son is helping her cover it up." Mick set down the glass and looked at me for the first time since I'd walked in. His face was weathered by smoke and age, but his eyes were sharp as ever. "That's a hell of a thing to say about your family. It's a hell of a thing for them to do to me." I told him everything. The midnight conversations, the surveillance camera, the emails, the affair. Mick listened without interruption, occasionally nodding or grunting, but mostly just letting me talk. When I finished, he poured 2 whiskeys and slid one across the bar. "So what's your plan?" he asked. "I don't have one yet. That's why I'm here." Mick sipped his whiskey and studied me like he was sizing up a rookie on his first day. "You want my advice? Walk away, file for divorce, take what you can get, and start over. You're 42, not 82. You've got time to build a new life." "With what?" "She's a partner at a major law firm. I install security systems. You think I'm going to get a fair shake in divorce court?" "Probably not," Mick admitted. "But the alternative is what? Revenge? That's a dangerous game, Jamie, especially against someone who knows how to play it better than you do." "Maybe, but I've got advantages she doesn't know about." "Such as?" I pulled out my phone and showed him a screenshot of one of Lydia's emails to Greg. "Such as evidence of adultery, such as the fact that she's been planning this divorce for 2 years and hiding assets in preparation. Such as the fact that I've got 3 months of sick leave saved up and nothing but time to make her life complicated." Mick read the email, then looked at me with something that might have been respect. "You've been busy. I'm just getting started." Over the next hour, Mick helped me sketch out the basics of a plan. Nothing illegal, nothing that would land me in jail or give Lydia grounds to claim harassment. Just a systematic campaign to make her a fair public knowledge and ensure that when the divorce finally happened, I'd have enough leverage to walk away with something more than the shirt on my back. We sat at his kitchen table with 2 beers sweating between our hands and a yellow legal pad between us. Mick's handwriting was blocky and efficient. He wrote like he fought fires, direct, no wasted motion. The plan on the page looked innocuous: steps, timelines, contingencies. The language was purposely bland because I wanted it to be unreadable to anyone who found it later. Sober verbs, dates, neutral nouns. The Polish made the intent more dangerous. "The key," Mick explained, tapping the pen twice against the paper, "is patience. You can't go nuclear right away. You've got to build pressure gradually. Make her think she's in control while you're actually pulling the strings." His tone was casual, but the idea landed like a cold stone. There was a logic to it, a slow squeeze rather than a sudden crush. If you push too hard too soon, people retreat into defense, hire lawyers, and hide what they can. You wanted the opposite: softening, carelessness, the very mistakes that become proof. "How do I do that?" I asked. "Start with the affair." Mick drew a little box and underlined it. "Make it public, but do it in a way that looks accidental. Let people draw their own conclusions." I pictured what he meant. A stray photograph posted by someone else, a casual mention over coffee that catches in the right ears, a text screenshot that appears to have been sent to the wrong person. The idea wasn't to scream betrayal from the rooftops. It was to unspool the truth gently and let curiosity do the rest. Social pressure in a neighborhood is relentless. Gossip is a machine that devours secrecy. "And then?" I asked, already hearing the small gears of the machine turning in my head. "Then you wait. Let her make the first move." He circled the word wait, slow and deliberate. "When she files for divorce, you'll be ready with evidence of adultery, proof that she's been hiding assets, and a sympathetic narrative about the faithful husband who got betrayed." He leaned back and watched my face for a reaction. It was clinical, an operations plan, not a sermon. It fit me because I had stopped trusting emotional outbursts. They felt like traps. I appreciated the cleanliness of it. There was honor in strategy if strategy returned what had been stolen. It was a good plan, a smart plan. The kind of methodical approach that had made Mick one of the best captains in the department. Calm under pressure, incremental, resilient. It would buy time and, more important, create a record. Lawyers fought over records. But as I drove home that evening, the plan felt insufficient. Not because it wouldn't work, because it probably would, but because winning the legal battle wasn't the same as making Lydia feel the cost of what she'd done. There was a visceral part of me that wanted her to understand not just the legal consequences, but the full, lived impact of her choices. The nights I'd spent pacing, the degradation of trust, the way our son had been hollowed out into a tool. I didn't just want to survive the divorce. I wanted Lydia to lose the illusion that she could walk away clean. I wanted her to regret every calculated lie, the secret bank transfers, the soft lies to friends told with a smile. The plan on Mick's pad could get me money and a fair share of custody leverage. What I wanted, too, was a reckoning. That night, when the house settled into the loose breathing of sleep, I lay awake and let the strategy refine itself. Small things, repeated. A missed dinner here, a public mention there, a volunteer comment from a friend that suggested she'd been seen with someone else. A carefully timed question in front of neighbors, nothing illegal, nothing theatrical, just the slow accumulation of suspicion made visible. By morning, I'd sharpened the edges. I would not scream. I would not break things. I would be the steady man people already believed I was. People trust the faithful husband. It's why sentinels of character are so effective in public opinion. The truth, delivered without drama, will sink in like a stone dropped into water. Quiet, unavoidable ripples. Lydia's routine cemented my plan. She was predictable. Coffee at 7, a shower at 7:15, dressed and out by 7:30. She kissed my cheek, tucked the briefcase under her arm, and left the house with the same practiced smile she used for colleagues and acquaintances. If you know the rhythms of someone's life, their predictability becomes a tool. This morning will be different, I thought, as I rose and moved through the motions. I said it aloud to myself in the kitchen, more like a statement of fact than a threat. When she reached for her car keys, I put a kettle on and waited. The sound of the garage door going up was a punctuation mark. She moved as she always did, efficient, gliding through the house like an actor who knows every line. "I've been thinking," I said, as she stood at the threshold, hand on the doorknob. "We should have Greg over for dinner sometime." The keys slipped from her fingers and clattered on the kitchen counter. For half a second, panic crossed her features. Thin, precise, not the loud gasp of discovery, but the quick high flash of fear someone buys for a scene. Then she smoothed herself, practiced composure reasserting itself. The lawyer's mask slid back into place, polite, controlled, unflappable, because the world had to think she was all business, all reason. She squared her shoulders and offered the commercial smile she believed everyone expected. That small misstep, keys hitting the counter, was more useful than a shout. It was evidence of a crack. It was a place to push later, not with violence, but with persistent, rational pressure. The plan wasn't about spectacle. It was about exposure in its mildest, most convincing forms. I wanted neighbors to tell the truth naturally. "Oh, I saw her with Greg last week," or "Haven't you noticed she's been out a lot lately?" People say what they see. All we needed was to make what she'd been doing visible in ways she couldn't easily explain away. I watched her collect herself and leave, watching the back of her as she walked to the car with an intimacy that smelled of betrayal. My mouth was iron. There was no gloating in me, there was resolution. The week ahead would require patience, a steady hand, and more documentation. I had Mick, I had a plan, and I had the moral clarity that comes from being wronged. I locked the door behind her mentally and physically. The house felt different, charged, not with drama, but with purpose. I poured coffee, checked the calendar, and began to mark dates, people, and small actions. The campaign had begun, and every small, legal, inexorable step would be tracked and filed. I had no illusions about cruelty. I only wanted truth, and if the truth demanded consequences, then consequences would come. Then the lawyer mask slipped back into place. "Greg?" she said carefully. "Why would we have Greg over for dinner?" "He's your boss, isn't he? I feel like I should get to know the people you work with, especially since you've been spending so much time at the office lately." Lydia picked up her keys, but I noticed her hand was shaking slightly. "Greg is very busy. I don't think he'd be interested in a social dinner." "Really? He seems like a social guy from what I've heard. Didn't you mention he has a boat?" "I don't think I mentioned that." "Huh. Maybe I'm thinking of someone else." I smiled at her, the same smile I'd been giving her for 15 years. "Anyway, just a thought. Have a good day at work." She left without kissing my cheek. It was a small victory, but an important one. I'd let her know that I was paying attention without revealing how much I actually knew. She'd spend the day wondering what else I might have figured out, and wondering would make her sloppy. My next stop was the office of Henderson's Auto Parts, where I'd installed a security system the previous week. Tom Henderson was a good customer and an even better gossip. If you wanted information to spread through the local business community, Tom was your man. "Jamie," he called out as I walked through the door. "What brings you back? System working okay?" "System's perfect. Actually, I wanted to ask you about something else. You know Greg Madison, right? Drives the silver BMW?" Tom's face lit up. He loved being asked for information almost as much as he loved sharing it. "Sure, I know Greg. Brings his car in for service sometimes." "Why?" "My wife works for his law firm. I was thinking about getting her something nice for our anniversary, and I heard Greg might know a good jeweler. Rich guy like that probably has connections, right?" "Oh yeah, Greg's got connections all right." Tom leaned across the counter conspiratorially. "You know he's going through a messy divorce? Wife caught him cheating with someone at the office, taking him for half of everything." I tried to look surprised. "Really? That's rough." "Yeah, and the funny thing is, the woman he's been seeing is married too. Real scandal from what I hear. Her husband doesn't know yet, but these things always come out eventually." "They sure do," I agreed. "Well, maybe I'll ask someone else about that jeweler recommendation." "Probably a good idea. Greg's got enough problems right now without worrying about anniversary gifts." I left Henderson's with a satisfied smile. Tom would have that story spread through half the town by lunchtime. "Hoffman said yesterday about the timing being off. I wanted to make sure you weren't worried." Worried. That was one way to put it. "Should I be worried?" She reached across the desk and took my hand. Her engagement ring, a 2-carat diamond I'd gone into debt to buy, catching the fluorescent light. "Of course not. You know how these medical things can be imprecise. The important thing is that we're having a baby together." Together. The word tasted like poison in the air between us. I squeezed her hand gently, playing the reassured husband while my mind catalogued every micro-expression crossing her face. "You're right," I said. "I'm probably overthinking things. It's just such big news, you know? Life-changing." "The best kind of life-changing," she agreed, then launched into a monologue about cribs and nursery colors and baby shower planning that felt like listening to someone plan their own funeral. I let her talk while I ate the expensive sandwich she'd brought, nodding at appropriate intervals and making supportive noises. But I was really studying her, memorizing the way she looked when she was lying, cataloging the tells I'd somehow missed during 8 years of marriage. The way her left eye twitched when she mentioned timing. How her voice pitched slightly higher when she talked about our baby. The nervous energy that made her fidget with her jewelry whenever she had to maintain eye contact for more than a few seconds. "I should get back to work," she said finally, checking her phone with the compulsive frequency that had become her signature move. "Client calls this afternoon." Client calls. I wondered if Caleb Bishop counted as a client and what services he was paying for. After she left, I called the genetic counseling office and moved our appointment up by 3 days, claiming work schedule conflicts. The receptionist was accommodating, noting that Dr. Hoffman had marked our case as priority due to some unspecified concerns in my wife's medical history. Concerns. That was an interesting word choice. I made a mental note to ask Dr. Hoffman about that during our next appointment. The rest of the week passed in a blur of careful observation and evidence gathering. Sienna's behavior became increasingly erratic as our genetic counseling appointment approached. She suggested postponing it twice, claiming work conflicts, then morning sickness, then a sudden concern about the safety of genetic testing during pregnancy. "I've been reading online," she said over dinner Thursday night, pushing her food around her plate without eating. "Some women say the test can be risky. Maybe we should wait until after the baby's born." I looked up from my own meal, feigning concern. "What kind of risks?" "Oh, you know, false positives, unnecessary stress. The internet's full of horror stories about couples who got bad information and made terrible decisions." Bad information. The irony was so thick, I could have cut it with my steak knife. "I thought you said Dr. Hoffman recommended it." "She did, but doctors don't always know best. Sometimes a mother's instincts are more important than medical advice." Mother's instincts. I wondered what her instincts were telling her about the trap that was closing around her with mathematical precision. "If you're really worried, we can discuss it with the counselor," I said reasonably. "Get professional advice about the risks versus benefits." She nodded reluctantly, but I could see the panic building behind her eyes. The appointment was tomorrow afternoon, and she was running out of excuses to avoid it. That night, she took another long bath while I made final preparations in my workshop. I'd arranged for Jennifer to be available by phone during the appointment, ready to verify the Chicago timeline if necessary. I'd also prepared copies of all my evidence, organized chronologically and cross-referenced with medical documentation. Most importantly, I'd scheduled a meeting with David Walsh, the best divorce attorney in the county, for Monday morning. Walsh had a reputation for being ruthless, but ethical, the kind of lawyer who could navigate complex financial situations without crossing legal lines. Friday afternoon arrived with unseasonable heat that made the genetic counseling office feel like a greenhouse. Sienna sat beside me in the waiting room, her leg bouncing with nervous energy while she pretended to read a magazine about pregnancy nutrition. "Mr. and Mrs. Hammond?" The genetic counselor was a soft-spoken woman in her 40s who radiated the kind of calm competence that made people trust her with their deepest secrets. "I'm Dr. Sarah Chen. Please, come in." Dr. Chen's office was decorated with family photos and children's artwork, the kind of space designed to put anxious couples at ease. She gestured for us to sit in comfortable chairs arranged around a small table covered with informational brochures. "Dr." Then I drove home, pulled up the surveillance footage from the night before, and started planning my next move. The game had begun, and I was already winning. The beauty of a well-executed plan is that your target doesn't realize they're being manipulated until it's too late. Over the next 2 weeks, I applied pressure to Lydia's life with the precision of a surgeon, each move calculated to increase her stress without revealing my hand. I started with her routine. Lydia was a creature of habit, and disrupting those habits was like removing the foundation stones from a building. I began showing up at unexpected times, bringing her lunch when she'd planned to eat with Greg, calling her office with urgent questions about household bills, scheduling repair appointments that required her to be home during her usual work hours. "The cable guy can only come between 2 and 4, I announced one morning over coffee. "I'll be at the Morrison job site, so you'll need to handle it." "I have depositions all afternoon. Can't you reschedule? The internet's been spotty, and I know how much you need it for work." She rescheduled the depositions. I also started paying attention to details I'd previously ignored. When she came home with a new necklace, I complimented it and asked where she'd gotten it. When she mentioned working late, I offered to bring her dinner. When she claimed to be at the office on weekends, I called the main number and left messages with the answering service. "Funny," I said after one such call. "The answering service said the building was closed for maintenance last Saturday. Where did you say you were working?" "The law library, downtown branch." "Ah, that makes sense." But I could see the wheels turning in her head, calculating how many other lies she might need to cover. The real pressure, though, came from making Greg Madison's life complicated. I'd learned his routine through careful observation. Coffee at Starbucks every morning at 7:45, lunch at the country club on Tuesdays and Thursdays, drinks at Murphy's Tavern on Friday evenings. I made sure to be at each location at exactly the right times, always friendly, always innocent, always just a little too interested in his personal life. "Greg, what a coincidence," I said, sliding into the booth across from him at Murphy's. "Mind if I join you? Lydia's working late again, and I hate drinking alone." He minded, but couldn't say so without seeming rude. "Of course. How are things, Jamie?" "Good, good. Though I have to ask you a favor. Man to man." Greg's hand tightened around his whiskey glass. "What kind of favor?" "Lydia's been working crazy hours lately. I know you're her boss, but she's got a family too. Think you could ease up on the workload a little?" "I'll see what I can do." "Thanks. I appreciate it. Marriage is tough enough without work getting in the way, you know? Speaking of which, how are you handling your divorce? Lydia mentioned it's been rough." "Lydia discussed my personal life with you?" "Just in passing. She's concerned about you. We both are." Greg finished his drink quickly and excused himself, but not before I'd planted the seed I wanted. The idea that Lydia was talking about their relationship at home, sharing details with her husband, making Greg vulnerable. The next week, I escalated. I started leaving evidence of my suspicions where Lydia would find it. A printout of Greg's divorce filing accidentally left on the kitchen counter, a receipt from a private investigator tucked into my wallet where she'd see it when she borrowed cash, a business card from a divorce attorney, bookmarking a page in the novel I was reading. Each piece of evidence was carefully calculated to suggest I was investigating without revealing how much I already knew. The goal was to make her panic, to force her into making mistakes. It worked better than I'd hoped. "Jamie, we need to talk," she said one evening after Ethan had disappeared into his room. "I found some things that concern me." "What kind of things?" "You know what kind of things." I set down my beer and looked at her with what I hoped was the right mixture of hurt and confusion. "Lydia, if you've got something to say, just say it. Are you having me investigated? Should I be?" The question hung between us like a challenge. Lydia was a skilled lawyer, trained to read people and situations, but she was also a woman whose carefully constructed world was starting to crumble. I could see the calculation in her eyes as she weighed her options. "I think we should consider counseling," she said finally. "Counseling?" "Marriage counseling. We've been growing apart, and I think professional help might—" "Are you having an affair?" The words came out flat and direct, cutting through her careful lawyer speak like a blade. She went very still, and I could see her mind racing through possible responses. That's a terrible thing to ask. It's a simple question, yes or no. "No, I'm not having an affair." "Then why do you need time to think about your answer?" "I don't—" You paused, Lydia, for almost 10 seconds. That's not the response of an innocent woman. She stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the kitchen floor. "I don't have to listen to this." "Actually, you do. This is my house too, and that's my marriage you're destroying." "I'm trying to save our marriage." "By lying to me? By sneaking around with your boss? By turning our son into your accomplice?" I'd gone too far. I could see it in her face the moment the words left my mouth. She knew that I knew about Ethan's involvement, which meant she'd start wondering what else I'd figured out. "What are you talking about?" "The midnight conversations, Lydia. The whispered conferences in his room. You think I don't hear you? We talk about you, Jamie. About how worried we are about your behavior lately. About how paranoid and suspicious you've become. Is that what you tell yourself? It's the truth. The truth is that you've been planning to leave me for 2 years. The truth is that you've been hiding money, building a case, and using our son to spy on me. The truth is that you're a liar and a cheat, And the only reason you haven't filed for divorce yet is because you're waiting for the right moment to maximize your advantage. Lydia went white. I'd revealed too much, but I was past caring. The careful game of cat and mouse had become a direct confrontation, and there was no going back. "How long have you known?" she asked quietly. "Long enough." "What do you want?" "I want my wife back. But since that's apparently not an option, I want you to understand that I'm not going to make this easy for you." "Are you threatening me?" "I'm promising you. You want a divorce? Fine. But it's going to cost you everything." She left the room without another word, and I heard her footsteps on the stairs, followed by the slam of our bedroom door. An hour later, I heard the familiar creak of floorboards as she made her way to Ethan's room. This time, I didn't follow her. I didn't need to. I already knew what they were discussing: damage control, exit strategies, and how to handle a husband who'd finally stopped playing by their rules. Let them plan. I had plans of my own. The call came on a Tuesday morning while I was installing motion sensors at the Riverside Medical Center. Ethan's voice was tight with something that might have been panic. "Dad, you need to come home. Now." "What's wrong?" "Just come home, please." I found my son sitting at the kitchen table, staring at a manila envelope like it might explode. He wasn't touching it, just keeping his hands close, fingers twitching, as if the thing might lunge at him if he relaxed. His face was pale, the kind of pale that comes from guilt more than fear, and his leg bounced restlessly under the table. This wasn't the same confident young man who'd stood by his mother's side the night she told me she was done pretending. This wasn't the kid who thought he could manage 2 households like a chessboard, believing he was mature enough to pick a side without consequences. No, this was just a scared 20-year-old who suddenly understood that playing adult games meant living with adult fallout. "What's in the envelope, Ethan?" His eyes lifted slowly, as if his head weighed more than it should. "Dad, I think you should sit down." "I'll stand." I nodded at the envelope. "What's in it?" He swallowed, hard, then pushed it toward me with 2 fingers, like it was radioactive. "Mom's lawyer sent it," he said quietly. "Divorce papers." I didn't rush. I just opened the flap, slid the papers out, and started reading. Irreconcilable differences, petition for dissolution of marriage, full request for spousal support, division of assets, house, cars, retirement accounts, a subtle but unmistakable positioning, everything to her advantage, everything assuming my cooperation, clean, calculated, prepared long before any fight ever happened. She hadn't reacted to me leaving. She'd anticipated it. "She's been planning this for a long time," I said. "Dad, How long have you known?" Ethan looked down at his hands, the same hands that used to build Lego towers with me on Saturday mornings, now gripping each other like he expected them to confess. 6 months, he said finally. Maybe more. The room felt colder. 6 months, I repeated. "And you didn't think your father deserved to know his wife was planning to divorce him?" He didn't answer at first. Then, "She made me promise not to tell you. She said it would be better if—" "Better for who?" I cut in. "For her? For you? Because it sure as hell wasn't better for me." "She said you'd try to fight it," he muttered. "That you'd make it ugly. She wanted to handle things quietly without a big scene." I laughed. He'd made occasional comments over the years about her spending habits, her treatment of service workers, her tendency to dominate conversations at social gatherings. "Why would you say that?" "Because you've been different for months. Distant. And now she's pregnant. And instead of being happy, you look like someone died." I wanted to tell him everything. The affair, the lies, the genetic testing that would prove the baby wasn't mine. I wanted to unload the burden of knowledge that had been eating at me for weeks. But I couldn't. Not yet. The timing wasn't right. and Eddie wouldn't understand the need for patience and strategic planning. "I'm fine," I said, just adjusting to the idea of being a father. He didn't believe me. I could see it in his eyes, but he let it go. "Okay, but if you need anything, you know I'm here, right? We all are." I nodded, feeling like a fraud for accepting support under false pretenses. These men thought they were congratulating a new father and supporting a friend through a major life transition. They had no idea they were actually witnessing the final days of an elaborate deception. The drive home took me through the heart of Millbrook Heights, past the perfectly manicured lawns and expensive cars that represented everything Sienna valued about our life together: status, image, the appearance of success and happiness, all of it built on lies that were about to collapse. I pulled into our driveway and sat in my truck for a moment, looking at the house we'd bought together 8 years ago. It was a beautiful home, colonial style, 4 bedrooms, finished basement, 2-car garage. The American dream made manifest in brick and mortar and a 30-year mortgage. Soon it would be gone, along with everything else Sienna had worked so hard to build. The divorce would force a sale, and the proceeds would be split according to Massachusetts law. But that was the least of what she was going to lose. Inside, the house was dark except for a light in Sienna's home office. I could hear her voice through the door, urgent and hushed, probably talking to Caleb about the genetic testing and its implications. I climbed the stairs quietly and went to bed alone, as I had most nights for the past 2 years. Tomorrow would be Sunday, and Sienna would probably want to go to brunch with Lila and discuss baby plans while I smiled and played the devoted husband. 5 more days until the test results arrived. 5 more days of pretending before I could finally stop lying to everyone, including myself. My phone buzzed with a text message. For a moment I thought it might be Eddie, checking on me after our conversation. Instead, it was from a number I didn't recognize. "Stop digging or you'll regret it." I stared at the screen, reading the message 3 times before its implications fully registered. Someone knew about my investigation. Someone was threatened enough by what I'd discovered to send anonymous warnings. The question was, who? Sienna didn't have the technical skills to trace my digital activities, and she was too image-conscious to resort to crude threats. Caleb was a gym rat with more muscles than brains, hardly the type for subtle intimidation. That left Lila, Sienna's best friend and co-conspirator. Lila worked in marketing like Sienna, which meant she understood digital communication and social media manipulation. She was also smart enough to realize that my discovery of the affair would implicate her as an accessory to the deception. I screenshot the message and saved it to my evidence folder. If they wanted to escalate beyond lies and adultery, I was ready for that too. I'd been planning for every contingency, including the possibility that Sienna's allies would try to intimidate me into silence. They had no idea who they were dealing with. I'd spent months building an airtight case, documenting every lie and preparing for every possible reaction. Anonymous threats weren't going to derail me now, not when I was so close to the finish line. I turned off my phone and went to sleep, dreaming of the day when I could finally tell my friends the truth about everything, the day when I could stop pretending to be someone I wasn't and start rebuilding my life on a foundation of honesty instead of lies. 4 more days. Sunday morning brought unseasonable rain and the sound of Sienna vomiting in the master bathroom. I lay in bed listening to her perform morning sickness for my benefit, timing the intervals between retching sounds with the precision of someone who'd been studying her deceptions for months. Real morning sickness was unpredictable, varying in intensity and timing. Sienna's version followed a pattern, exactly 12 minutes of theatrical suffering, followed by a shower and the application of makeup to create the pale, wan look of a woman struggling with early pregnancy. I waited until I heard the hairdryer before getting up and making coffee. Or maybe you're just a means to an end, a way to secure her position at the firm, build her client base, and establish herself financially before she makes her move. What do you want from me? I want you to understand that you're not the hero of this story. You're not rescuing her from an unhappy marriage. You're helping her destroy a family for her own benefit. Your marriage was already over, Jamie. Lydia told you what she needed you to believe. Just like she's been telling me what she thought I needed to hear. The difference is, I finally figured out the game. I stood up and walked to the door, then turned back to face him. One more thing, Greg. When this is all over, when the divorce is finalized and the assets are divided, don't be surprised if Lydia suddenly decides she needs some space to figure out what she really wants. Don't be surprised if the woman who was so eager to be with you suddenly finds reasons to postpone the wedding. And don't be surprised if you find yourself replaced by someone younger, richer, or more useful to her career. You're just trying to cause problems between us. I don't need to cause problems. I just need to wait for the ones that already exist to surface. I left him sitting in his expensive study with his expensive scotch, contemplating the possibility that he'd been as thoroughly manipulated as I had. It was a small victory, but an important one. I'd planted doubt in his mind, and doubt was a powerful weapon in the right hands. The war was just beginning. The first crack in Lydia's carefully constructed plan appeared 3 days after my conversation with Greg. I was replacing the locks on the Hendersons' store, a precaution after a break-in the previous week, when Tom Henderson pulled me aside. Jamie, I probably shouldn't tell you this, but I thought you should know. Greg Madison was in here yesterday, asking about you. I kept my expression neutral while my pulse quickened. Asking, what about me? Wanted to know how long I'd known you, what kind of man you were, whether you were the type to cause trouble. Seemed real interested in your background. What did you tell him? The truth, that you're solid, reliable, and not someone to mess with if you've been wronged. Tom paused, studying my face. Everything okay between you two? He seemed pretty worried about something. Just a misunderstanding. Thanks for letting me know. But it wasn't a misunderstanding. It was Greg trying to assess the threat I represented, which meant my visit to his house had accomplished exactly what I'd intended. He was starting to question Lydia's motives, and that uncertainty was making him nervous. The second crack appeared that evening when I came home to find Lydia waiting in the kitchen, divorce papers spread across the table like battle plans. We need to discuss the terms, she said without preamble. I thought you'd already decided the terms. I'm trying to be reasonable, Jamie. Fair. Fair? I pulled out a chair and sat down across from her. Let's talk about fair. Fair would have been telling me 2 years ago that you were unhappy. Fair would have been marriage counseling before you started sleeping with your boss. Fair would have been honesty instead of manipulation. I'm offering you the house and half the savings. Generous, considering you've already moved most of our money into accounts I can't access. Her composure slipped for just a moment. I don't know what you're talking about. The offshore account, Lydia. The one Greg helped you set up. The one with $40,000 of our money in it. I was bluffing. I hadn't found any offshore accounts. But her reaction told me I was close to something. She went very still, and I could see her mind racing through possibilities. You're fishing, she said finally. Maybe. But I'm catching something, aren't I? What do you want? I want you to drop the spousal support request. That's not going to happen. Then we go to trial. Full discovery, depositions, character witnesses, everything comes out in public record. You can't afford a trial, Jamie. I know exactly how much money you have, and it's not enough to fight me in court. You'd be surprised what I can afford when I'm motivated. That was also a bluff, but a better one. I'd been saving money for months, ever since I'd first suspected something was wrong. Not enough for a prolonged legal battle, but enough to make things expensive for her. This doesn't have to be ugly, she said. It became ugly the moment you decided to cheat on me instead of talking to me. I tried to talk to you. You never listened. When? When did you try to talk to me about being unhappy? Lydia opened her mouth to answer, then closed it again. We both knew she was lying. There had been no conversations, no attempts to work on our marriage, no indication that she was anything other than satisfied with our life together. Her carefully constructed deception was collapsing, and she was finally understanding that I'd been investigating her with the same thoroughness she'd applied to lying to me. "What do you want?" she asked finally. It was the first honest question she'd asked me in months. "I want you gone. Tonight. Pack a bag and leave. Go to Caleb's, go to Lila's, I don't care. But I want you out of my house. This is my house, too. Not anymore. My lawyer will be in touch tomorrow about the divorce proceedings." She stood up abruptly, her face flushed with anger. "You can't just throw me out. I have rights. You have the right to leave voluntarily, or you have the right to be exposed publicly when the genetic test results arrive Friday. Your choice." The threat hung between us like a blade. Sienna was smart enough to understand the implications. If she left quietly, she might salvage some dignity and avoid complete social destruction. If she forced a public confrontation, I'd make sure everyone in Millbrook Heights knew exactly what kind of person she really was. "I need time to think," she said. "You have until tomorrow morning. After that, I start making phone calls." She gathered her purse and keys, moving with the mechanical precision of someone in shock. At the door, she turned back to look at me. "I never meant for it to happen this way." "Yes, you did," I said quietly. "You planned all of it. The affair, the pregnancy, the lies. The only thing you didn't plan for was getting caught." After she left, I poured myself a real drink and sat in my workshop, surrounded by the evidence of her betrayal. My phone buzzed with text messages. Sienna, probably, or maybe Lila, trying to manage the crisis that was spiraling out of their control. I didn't read them. Tomorrow, I'd meet with David Walsh and begin the legal process of untangling my life from Sienna's web of lies. Tomorrow, I'd start telling people the truth about what had really been happening in my marriage. But tonight, for the first time in months, I was alone in my house, without having to pretend to be someone I wasn't. The relief was overwhelming. 3 more days until the genetic test results arrived, but the real test was already over. Sienna had failed it the moment she decided that lies were easier than truth, that deception was preferable to honesty. Now she'd have to live with the consequences of those choices, just as I'd learned to live with the consequences of trusting someone who'd never deserved it. My phone rang. Eddie's number on the caller ID. "Nick, Sarah just called. She said she saw Sienna leaving your house with suitcases. Everything okay?" I looked around my workshop, at the evidence of months of careful investigation, at the tools I'd used to build a case that would destroy my wife's carefully constructed lies. "Actually, Eddie, everything's perfect. Can you come over? I think it's time I told you what's really been going on." David Walsh's law office occupied the top floor of a glass building downtown, with windows that offered a commanding view of Boston Harbor. The man himself was exactly what I'd expected from his reputation. Mid-50s, silver-haired, wearing a suit that cost more than most people's monthly salary. The kind of lawyer who charged by the minute and earned every penny. "Mr. Hammond," he said, gesturing for me to sit in one of the leather chairs facing his massive desk. "I understand you're looking at a divorce with some unusual circumstances." That's one way to put it. I opened the briefcase I'd brought and began laying out evidence in neat stacks. My wife is pregnant with another man's child and has been trying to pass it off as mine. Walsh's expression didn't change as he examined the documents I'd prepared. Phone records, hotel receipts, medical documentation, photographs, everything organized with the precision of a criminal prosecutor building a case. "This is thorough work," he said after several minutes. "Very thorough. You missed your calling as a private investigator." I had motivation. He leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. The good news is that adultery is still grounds for divorce in Massachusetts, and fraud regarding paternity is taken very seriously by family courts. The bad news is that proving all of this could get expensive and time-consuming. How expensive? With this much evidence? Not very. Your wife's attorney will probably recommend settlement rather than fight a case they can't win. He paused, studying my face. The question is what you want out of this. Financial settlement, public vindication, complete destruction of your wife's reputation? It was a fair question, and one I'd been asking myself for weeks. What did I want? Money seemed inadequate compensation for 8 years of lies. Public vindication felt petty. But complete destruction. I want her to face consequences, I said finally. Real consequences. You destroyed him when you started planning a future that didn't include him. Jessica was crying now, but I felt nothing. No sympathy, no desire to comfort her, no urge to take back my words. So what happens now? She asked. Now you make a choice. A real choice. Either you end things with Tyler completely, and I mean completely, no contact, no friendship, no nothing, and we try to rebuild our marriage, or you admit that this marriage is over and we start divorce proceedings. And if I choose to try to rebuild our marriage? Then you're going to have to earn back my trust. You're going to have to prove that you're committed to me and to our family. You're going to have to accept that things will never be the same between us. What does that mean? It means no more girls' nights with Sabrina. It means no more gym memberships. It means complete transparency about where you are and who you're with. It means couples counseling and individual therapy and whatever else it takes to fix what you broke. That sounds like a prison sentence. It sounds like the consequences of your choices. You wanted to act like a single woman while enjoying the benefits of being married. Now you get to choose which one you actually want to be. Jessica wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. And if I choose divorce? Then we'll handle it like adults. We'll split our assets, work out custody arrangements for Maya, and move on with our lives. But understand this. If you choose divorce, there's no going back. I won't be your backup plan. I won't be here waiting for you if things don't work out with Tyler or whoever comes after Tyler. You'd really do that? You'd really let me go? I looked at my wife, really looked at her, and realized that I already had let her go. Somewhere in the past few days, between discovering her affair and watching her try to manipulate the situation to her advantage, I'd stopped loving her, not stopped caring about her, not stopped wanting the best for her, but stopped being in love with her. Jessica, I said quietly, I already have let you go. The question is whether you're ready to let me go too. She stared at me for a long moment, and I could see her trying to figure out if I was bluffing, trying to determine if this was just a negotiating tactic or if I really meant what I was saying. I need time to think, she said finally. You have until Sunday. That's 3 days. On Sunday night, you tell me what you've decided, and we move forward from there. And in the meantime? In the meantime, you sleep in the guest room. You don't contact Tyler. You don't discuss this with Sabrina or anyone else. You figure out what you want your life to look like, and you make your choice. Jessica nodded slowly. Okay. Okay. She started to leave the kitchen, then turned back. Evan, what if I choose to try to save our marriage? What if I do everything you're asking? Will you be able to forgive me? I considered the question seriously. Could I forgive her? Could I trust her again? Could I love her the way I used to? I don't know, I said honestly. But I'm willing to try if you are. And if I choose divorce? Then I hope you'll be happy. I really do. But I also hope you understand that actions have consequences, and some things can't be undone. Jessica nodded again and left the kitchen. I heard her footsteps on the stairs, heard the guest room door close, heard the house settle into an unfamiliar quiet. I poured myself a glass of water and sat at the kitchen table, thinking about the conversation I'd just had. For the first time in years, I'd been completely honest with Jessica about how I felt and what I wanted. It was terrifying and liberating at the same time. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Your wife made her choice a long time ago. You're just too blind to see it." T. Tyler, apparently, wasn't ready to give up. But that was his problem, not mine. I'd said what I needed to say to both of them. Now it was time to let the chips fall where they may. I deleted the text without responding and went upstairs to my bedroom. Our bedroom. The room that Jessica and I had shared for 8 years, where we'd made love and fought and dreamed about our future together. Tomorrow, I'd start preparing for whatever came next. But tonight, I was going to sleep alone in my own bed and try to remember what it felt like to have some dignity. Sunday came faster than I expected. Jessica had spent the weekend moving around the house like a ghost, present, but not really there. She made breakfast for Maya, did laundry, worked in her home office, all while avoiding any meaningful conversation with me. Maya noticed, of course. Teenagers had radar for family tension. "Are you and Mom fighting?" she asked me Saturday afternoon while Jessica was at the grocery store. "We're working through some issues," I said. She took the stand wearing a conservative blue suit and spoke in measured tones about living in fear, about walking on eggshells, about the gradual escalation of my controlling and threatening behavior. "He installed cameras in our house without telling me," she testified. "He followed me to work, showed up at my office unannounced, confronted my colleagues. He emptied our bank accounts and threatened to destroy my career if I tried to leave him." It was all technically true, but presented in a way that made me sound like a dangerous stalker instead of a betrayed husband trying to understand what was happening to his marriage. When it was my turn to testify, Pat had prepared me carefully. "Stick to the facts. Don't show anger. Let the jury see the reasonable man, not the vengeful husband." "Mr. Harlan," she began, "why did you install surveillance equipment in your home?" "Because I suspected my wife was having an affair and I needed evidence." "Did you threaten your wife when you discovered the affair?" "No, I was hurt and angry, but I never threatened her." "Did you threaten Mr. Madison?" "I told him that his relationship with my wife was destroying my family. I may have been forceful in my language, but I never threatened violence." "Why did you confront your wife's lover?" "Because I wanted him to understand the consequences of his actions. He wasn't just having an affair with a married woman. He was helping to destroy a family." The cross-examination was brutal. Lydia's attorney, a sharp-dressed woman named Catherine Walsh, attacked every aspect of my testimony, trying to paint me as a man whose anger had spiraled out of control. "Mr. Harlan, isn't it true that you told Mr. Madison he would regret the day he decided to interfere with your family?" I may have said something like that. "And isn't it true that you vandalized his car?" I was angry. I made some poor choices. Poor choices that involved criminal behavior. "Objection," Pat interjected. "Mr. Harlan has not been charged with any crime." Sustained. But the damage was done. Walsh had made her point. I was a man whose anger had led to destructive behavior, and the implication was clear. If I could vandalize a car, what might I do to a person? The trial lasted 3 days, and by the end of it, I felt like I'd been put through a meat grinder. Both sides had presented their cases, called their witnesses, and made their arguments. Now it was up to the judge to decide who was telling the truth. Judge Margaret Harrison was a stern woman in her 60s who'd built her reputation on fairness and careful deliberation. She took 2 days to review the evidence and testimony before calling us back to court for her decision. "This case," she began, "represents the unfortunate reality that divorce brings out the worst in people. Both parties have made accusations, and both parties have behaved in ways they probably regret." My heart sank. It sounded like she was preparing to split the difference, to give Lydia most of what she wanted while throwing me a few scraps to make it seem fair. "However," Judge Harrison continued, The evidence does not support the plaintiff's claims of abuse or threatening behavior. While Mr. Harlan's actions were sometimes inappropriate, they appear to be the reactions of a man who discovered his wife's infidelity and responded with understandable, if misguided, anger. I felt a surge of hope. Furthermore, the evidence clearly shows that Mrs. Harlan engaged in a prolonged affair while making extensive preparations for divorce, including the movement of marital assets and the involvement of the couple's son in deceptive practices. Lydia's face had gone white. Therefore, the court finds that Mrs. Harlan's request for spousal support is denied. The marital assets will be divided equally, with Mr. Harlan receiving the family home and Mrs. Harlan receiving equivalent value in other assets. Both parties will share custody of their adult son, should he choose to maintain relationships with both parents. It was better than I'd hoped for, but Judge Harrison wasn't finished. I want to address both parties directly. Mr. Harlan, your behavior during this process has been problematic. While understandable, confronting your wife's lover and vandalizing his property were serious errors in judgment that could have resulted in criminal charges. You're fortunate that Mr. Madison chose not to press charges. She turned to Lydia. Mrs. Harlan, while adultery is not illegal, your conduct throughout this marriage and divorce has been deeply troubling. You manipulated your husband, your son, and your lover to serve your own interests. You made extensive preparations for divorce while maintaining the pretense of a loving marriage. Most concerning, you attempted to use false accusations of abuse as a litigation strategy. Such behavior is not only unethical but potentially criminal. The judge's words hit Lydia like physical blows. I could see her composure cracking, the lawyer mask finally slipping away to reveal the frightened woman underneath. This divorce is granted. Court is adjourned. As the gavel fell, I felt a mixture of relief and emptiness. I'd won, but what exactly had I won? A house full of memories, half of our savings, and the knowledge that my marriage had been a lie for years. Lydia left the courtroom quickly, surrounded by her legal team. She didn't look at me, didn't acknowledge the end of our 15-year marriage with so much as a nod. Greg Madison wasn't there. He'd been fired from the law firm the week before, his partnership dissolved, and his career in ruins. Ethan was waiting for me in the hallway outside the courtroom. He looked older than his 21 years, worn down by months of being caught between his parents. Dad, I'm sorry. About everything. About lying to you. About helping her. I thought I was doing the right thing. You were trying to protect your mother, I understand that. Are you going to be okay? I'm going to be fine. What about you? What are your plans? I'm thinking about going back to school, maybe studying somewhere far from here, starting over. That sounds like a good idea. We hugged awkwardly, and I realized it was the first physical contact we'd had in months. My son, the boy I'd taught to ride a bike and throw a baseball, had become a stranger. Maybe someday we could rebuild our relationship, but it would take time. As I walked out of the courthouse into the cold November air, I thought about the past year and everything that had changed. I'd lost my wife, my marriage, and my faith in the people I'd trusted most. But I'd also discovered something about myself. When pushed to the breaking point, I was stronger than anyone had expected. Lydia had underestimated me, and that mistake had cost her everything she'd schemed to gain. She'd wanted a quiet divorce that left her with the house, the money, and her reputation intact. Instead, she'd gotten a public trial that exposed her affair, her manipulation, and her willingness to destroy anyone who stood in her way. The story spread quickly through our small community. Within a week, everyone knew about Lydia's affair, her lies, and the judge's scathing assessment of her character. Her career at the law firm was effectively over. No client wanted to be represented by a lawyer who'd been publicly censured for unethical behavior. Greg Madison had already left town, his legal career in ruins and his divorce finalized on terms far less favorable than he'd expected. The woman he'd thought he loved had destroyed both their lives in pursuit of her own ambitions. 3 months later, I was sitting in my kitchen now, in my house, reading a letter from Ethan. He'd enrolled in a college in California and was studying engineering. He sounded happy, or at least hopeful, for the first time in years. The doorbell rang, and I opened it to find Lydia standing on my front porch. She looked terrible, thin, tired, older than her 39 years. The confident lawyer who'd tried to destroy me in court had been replaced by a broken woman who'd lost everything she'd valued. "Can I come in?" she asked. "Why?" I wanted to apologize, to try to explain. "There's nothing to explain. You made your choices. I know you hate me." "I don't hate you, Lydia. I don't feel anything for you at all anymore." She flinched as if I'd slapped her. "That's worse than hate." "Maybe, but it's honest. I never meant for things to go this far. I thought I could handle it quietly without hurting anyone." "You thought you could have your affair, take half my assets, and walk away without consequences. You thought I was too stupid or too weak to fight back. I was wrong." "Yes, you were." She stood there for a moment longer, maybe hoping I'd invite her in, maybe hoping for some sign of the man who'd once loved her enough to marry her. But that man was gone, destroyed by her lies and manipulation. "Goodbye, Jamie." "Goodbye, Lydia." I closed the door and went back to my kitchen, back to my coffee and my son's letter. Outside, I heard her car start and drive away, taking the last remnant of my old life with it. I was 43 years old, divorced, and starting over. But I was also free. Free from lies, free from manipulation, free from people who saw me as nothing more than an obstacle to their ambitions. It wasn't the life I'd planned, but it was honest. And after everything I'd been through, honesty was enough.